Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her friends played with dolls, she climbed trees and wrestled with her 3 older brothers. Her father, a retired Marine, taught her to shoot when she was 12. Her mother worried that Sarah was too rough, too bold for a young woman. At 18, Sarah shocked everyone by walking into the Army recruitment office. The recruiter, Sergeant Thompson, looked her up and down with doubt in his eyes. "Are you sure about this, miss? The military isn't like the movies. It's hard work, and frankly, most women don't make it through basic training." Sarah's jaw tightened. She had heard this before. "I'm not most women," she replied firmly. Her family's reaction was mixed. Her father felt proud but worried. Her mother cried for 3 days straight. Her brothers laughed, thinking she would quit within a week. The town gossips whispered that Sarah was just trying to prove something, that she would come running home as soon as things got tough. During basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Sarah faced constant challenges. Drill Sergeant Williams seemed to have it out for her from day one. "Martinez, you think because you're a woman, I'll go easy on you? Think again," he would shout during the morning runs. Other recruits watched as Sarah struggled with the physical demands. Some felt sorry for her. Others waited for her to break. The women in her unit were divided. Some supported her, while others worried she would make them all look bad if she failed. Sarah's first real test came during the obstacle course. She was smaller than most of the men, but she was determined. When she fell from the rope climb for the 3rd time, muddy and exhausted, she heard someone mutter, maybe she should have stayed home and learned to cook instead. That night, Sarah sat on her bunk staring at the letter from home. Her mother begged her to come back. Her high school boyfriend had written that he would take her back if she forgot this silly phase. Even her best friend suggested that maybe everyone was right. Maybe this wasn't for her. But Sarah remembered her grandfather's stories about World War II. He had always told her that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about being scared and doing what needed to be done anyway. She folded the letters, put them in her locker, and decided she wasn't going anywhere. The next morning, Sarah was first in line for the obstacle course. She attacked each challenge with fierce determination. When she reached the rope climb, she took a deep breath and started up. Her hands burned, her arms shook, but she kept climbing. When she rang the bell at the top, the whole training ground went quiet. Drill Sergeant Williams walked over to her as she caught her breath. For a moment, his hard expression softened. "Not bad, Martinez. Not bad at all." It was the first compliment he had given her in 8 weeks. That evening, Sarah called home. When her mother answered, she could hear the worry in her voice. "Sarah, honey, when are you coming home?" "I'm not coming home, Mom," Sarah said quietly. "This is where I belong." Her mother was silent for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised Sarah. "Your grandfather would be proud of you. He always said you had his fighting spirit." As Sarah hung up the phone, she realized something important. The people who doubted her weren't necessarily wrong to worry. Military life was hard, dangerous, and demanding. But they were wrong about one thing. They thought being a woman made her weak. Sarah was learning that her strength didn't come from being like the men around her. It came from being exactly who she was. The other recruits had started to notice the change in Sarah. She helped struggling soldiers with their gear, shared her rations with those who needed extra food, and never complained during the long marches. Slowly, she was earning their respect, but Sarah knew that basic training was just the beginning. The real test would come when she faced actual danger, when lives depended on her decisions. She had no idea that test would come sooner than anyone expected, in a place far from the Texas town that had doubted her, under circumstances that would change everything. 2 years later, Private First Class Sarah Martinez found herself at Forward Operating Base Phoenix in Afghanistan. The desert heat was crushing, and the constant threat of enemy attacks kept everyone on edge. Sarah had proven herself during training, but being in a combat zone was different from anything she had experienced. Her unit, the 2nd Infantry Division, was tasked with securing supply routes and protecting local villages from Taliban attacks. Sarah worked as a communications specialist, but she had cross-trained in medical aid and weapons handling. Her commanding officer, Captain James Rodriguez, had initially been skeptical about having women in his unit. "Martinez, you're here to do a job, not to prove a point," Captain Rodriguez had told her on her first day. "Keep your head down, follow orders, and maybe you'll make it home in one piece." The other soldiers in her unit had mixed feelings about Sarah's presence. Corporal Mike Johnson, a tough guy from Detroit, made it clear he thought women didn't belong in combat zones. "This isn't a game," he would tell anyone who would listen. "When bullets start flying, she'll be a liability." But Specialist Tony Garcia, who had served 2 tours already, took a different approach. "Martinez seems solid," he told the others. "Give her a chance to prove herself before you write her off." Sarah's first real taste of combat came during a routine patrol. The unit was escorting a supply convoy through a narrow mountain pass when the ambush happened. The sound of automatic gunfire erupted from the rocks above them. Sarah's heart pounded as bullets struck the ground around her feet. "Take cover," shouted Sergeant First Class David Kim, the squad leader. Sarah dove behind a rocky outcrop, her hands shaking as she reached for her radio to call for backup. The firefight lasted 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. Sarah watched as Corporal Johnson dragged a wounded soldier to safety, his earlier doubts about her forgotten in the chaos of battle. When the shooting stopped, 3 soldiers were wounded, but everyone was alive. After the medics treated the injured, Captain Rodriguez gathered the unit. "Good work today, everyone. We kept our heads and brought everyone home." His eyes found Sarah in the group. "Martinez, your communication with base was clear and fast. Well done." That night, as Sarah cleaned her rifle, Corporal Johnson sat down beside her. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I was wrong about you. You didn't panic out there." Sarah looked up from her weapon. "I was terrified," she admitted. "But I knew everyone was depending on me to do my job." Johnson nodded slowly. "That's what courage is, I guess. Being scared and doing it anyway." Word of Sarah's performance in the firefight spread through the base. Some of the male soldiers who had been cold to her before started including her in conversations. Others remained skeptical, waiting for her to make a mistake. The local Afghan women in the nearby village had also begun to notice Sarah. During humanitarian missions, they would approach her instead of the male soldiers. Through an interpreter, an elderly woman named Fatima told Sarah, "You are strong like my daughter was before the Taliban took her. It gives us hope to see a woman who fights." These words meant more to Sarah than any praise from her superiors. She was beginning to understand that her presence meant something beyond just doing her job. She represented possibility to people who had been told what women could and couldn't do. 3 months into her deployment, Sarah received a letter from her hometown newspaper. They wanted to write a story about the local girl making good in Afghanistan. Sarah threw the letter away. She wasn't there to be a symbol or a feel-good story. She was there to serve her country and protect her fellow soldiers. But fate had other plans. Intelligence reports indicated that a major Taliban offensive was being planned in their sector. The enemy was moving weapons and fighters into position for what appeared to be a coordinated attack on multiple bases. Captain Rodriguez called his senior staff together for a briefing. "We're looking at a serious situation here," he said, pointing to the map. "Intelligence suggests they're planning to hit us hard within the next 48 hours. Sarah studied the map carefully. Her communications training had taught her to think about logistics and coordination. "Sir, if they're planning multiple attacks, they'll need to coordinate timing. That means a lot of radio chatter." Rodriguez looked at her with interest. "What are you thinking, Martinez? If I can monitor their frequencies and track their communications, we might be able to predict when and where they'll strike first." The captain considered this. "It's worth a try, but if you're wrong, people could die." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. This wasn't about proving herself anymore. This was about keeping her friends alive. She spent the next 36 hours glued to her radio equipment, listening to fragments of conversation in Pashto and Dari, trying to piece together the enemy's plan. As dawn approached on what would become the most important day of her military career, Sarah thought about her grandfather's words about courage. She had no idea that in just a few hours she would need every ounce of that courage to survive what was coming. The attack came at dawn, just as Sarah had predicted. She had been monitoring enemy radio traffic all night when she heard the code word that meant the assault was beginning. Her heart raced as she grabbed her radio to warn the base. "Phoenix Base, this is Martinez. We have incoming. Multiple enemy forces moving toward the perimeter." "This is not a drill." The base erupted into action. Soldiers ran to their positions as mortars began falling around the compound. Sarah's communication center became the nerve center of the defense, coordinating with air support, nearby units, and headquarters. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. Martinez, I need you to maintain contact with all units. We're spread thin and communication is critical. For 6 hours, Sarah managed multiple radio frequencies while explosions shook the building around her. She coordinated medical evacuations, called in airstrikes, and kept track of ammunition supplies. Her hands moved quickly across the radio controls, switching between frequencies to maintain contact with scattered patrol units. During a brief lull in the fighting, Sergeant Kim burst into her communication center. Martinez, we've got a problem. Alpha Squad is pinned down about 2 kilometers north. They're requesting immediate extraction, but we can't get a vehicle through. Sarah looked at the map. Alpha Squad was trapped in a valley with enemy forces on the high ground. What about air support? Negative. Weather's moving in and visibility is getting worse. They're on their own unless someone can reach them on foot. Captain Rodriguez arrived, his uniform dirty and torn from the fighting. The situation is bad. Alpha Squad has 2 wounded, and they're running low on ammunition. We need volunteers for a rescue mission. Sarah stood up from her radio station. I volunteer, sir. Rodriguez shook his head immediately. Absolutely not. I need you here on communications. Sir, I can carry a portable radio. I can maintain contact while moving, and Alpha Squad knows my voice. They trust me, the captain hesitated. Several male soldiers had also volunteered. But Sarah made a compelling point about the communications aspect. Martinez, this isn't a training exercise. This is real combat in hostile territory. I understand that, sir. But those are our people out there. After a tense moment, Rodriguez nodded grimly. Take Corporal Johnson and Specialist Garcia with you. Stay in radio contact every 10 minutes. If you can't reach Alpha Squad within 2 hours, abort the mission and return to base. Sarah quickly gathered her gear, rifle, ammunition, medical supplies, and her portable radio equipment. Johnson and Garcia checked their weapons and supplies. As they prepared to leave, Rodriguez pulled Sarah aside. Martinez, I know you want to prove yourself, but don't take unnecessary risks. Getting yourself killed won't help Alpha Squad. Sarah met his eyes steadily. I'm not trying to prove anything anymore, sir. I'm just trying to bring our people home. The 3 soldiers left the base through a rear entrance, moving carefully through the rocky terrain. The sound of gunfire echoed across the valley as they made their way toward Alpha Squad's position. Sarah maintained radio contact with the base while navigating the difficult ground. After an hour of careful movement, they reached a ridge overlooking the valley where Alpha Squad was trapped. Sarah could see the enemy positions through her binoculars. Taliban fighters had taken positions in the rocks above Alpha Squad, keeping them pinned down with constant gunfire. Phoenix Base, this is Martinez. I have eyes on Alpha Squad. Enemy forces have them surrounded, requesting permission to engage. Rodriguez's voice came back tense. Martinez, your orders are extraction, not engagement. Get our people and get out. But as Sarah watched, she saw one of Alpha Squad's soldiers fall. Time was running out. She made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. Johnson, Garcia, I need you to create a distraction on the left flank. Draw their fire away from Alpha Squad. Garcia looked at her with concern. What are you going to do? I'm going to get our people. Sarah checked her rifle and adjusted her radio pack. Give me 15 minutes, then start your distraction. Before either man could object, Sarah was moving down the ridge toward Alpha Squad's position. She used every bit of cover available, moving from rock to rock while enemy bullets whined overhead. Her radio crackled with Captain Rodriguez's angry voice. Martinez, what is your position? Report immediately. Sarah kept moving, knowing that stopping to answer would give away her location to the enemy. She could see Alpha Squad's position clearly now. 4 soldiers, 2 wounded, hiding behind a fallen tree trunk. The enemy fire was so intense they couldn't even lift their heads. When she was 50 meters away, Sarah keyed her radio. Alpha Squad, this is Martinez. I'm coming to you from the south. Be ready to move when I give the signal. Sergeant Williams, Alpha Squad's leader, responded with disbelief. Martinez, what the hell are you doing here? Coming to get you home, Sergeant. Sarah looked at her watch. Johnson and Garcia would start their distraction in 2 minutes. She checked her rifle one more time and prepared for the most dangerous sprint of her life. Everything that happened next would be talked about for years among the soldiers who served at Forward Operating Base Phoenix. Sarah was about to discover what she was truly capable of when everything was on the line. The explosion from Johnson and Garcia's distraction echoed across the valley, drawing enemy fire to the left. Sarah took a deep breath and sprinted across the open ground toward Alpha Squad's position. Bullets kicked up dirt around her feet as she ran in a zigzag pattern, making herself a harder target. She dove behind the fallen tree trunk just as a burst of automatic fire splintered the wood above her head. Sergeant Williams stared at her in amazement. "Martinez, I can't believe you made it through that." Sarah quickly assessed the situation. Private Anderson had been shot in the leg and was losing blood. Corporal Blake had taken shrapnel in his shoulder. The other two soldiers, Private First Class Chen and Specialist Morrison, were uninjured but exhausted from hours of fighting. "What's our ammunition situation?" Sarah asked while checking Anderson's wound. "We're down to our last few magazines," Williams replied. "We've been rationing shots for the past hour." Sarah pulled out her medical kit and worked on Anderson's leg wound while bullets continued to fly overhead. "I've got a plan to get us out of here, but we need to move fast." She keyed her radio. "Phoenix Base, this is Martinez. I'm with Alpha Squad. We have 2 wounded and need immediate extraction support." Captain Rodriguez's voice was sharp with concern. "Martinez, what is your status? Can you move the wounded?" "Anderson can walk with support. Blake is mobile. We need covering fire for extraction. Negative on air support. Weather is still too bad for helicopters. You'll have to make it back on foot." Sarah studied the terrain around them. The enemy had them surrounded on 3 sides, with only one possible escape route through a narrow ravine. But that route would expose them to sniper fire from the high ground. "Williams, I need you and Morrison to carry Anderson. Chen and Blake can cover our retreat. I'll take point and maintain radio contact." Williams shook his head. "Martinez, you should stay in the middle of the group where it's safer." "Let me take point." "No offense, Sergeant, but I'm the communications specialist. If something happens to me, we lose contact with base and backup." Sarah checked her rifle magazine. "Besides, I'm the smallest target." Before Williams could argue further, Sarah was on the radio coordinating with Johnson and Garcia. "Garcia, I need you to maintain pressure on the left flank for another 10 minutes. Then fall back to checkpoint Charlie and wait for us." The retreat began with Sarah leading the way through the ravine. She moved carefully, checking for enemy positions while maintaining radio contact with the base. Behind her, Williams and Morrison carried the wounded Anderson between them, while Chen and Blake provided rear security. They had made it halfway through the ravine when the enemy spotted them. Gunfire erupted from both sides of the narrow passage. Sarah pressed herself against the rock wall as bullets ricocheted around them. "Contact left and right," she called into her radio. "We're taking heavy fire in the ravine." Captain Rodriguez's voice came back immediately. "Martinez, can you continue forward or do you need to fall back?" Sarah peered around the rock and saw enemy fighters moving to cut off their escape route. If they retreated now, they would be trapped with no way out. If they pushed forward, they would have to run through intense crossfire. "We're committed now, sir. Going forward is our only option," she turned to Williams. "When I give the signal, everyone runs for the far end of the ravine. Don't stop, don't look back, just run." "What about covering fire?" Chen asked. Sarah looked at her rifle, then at the enemy positions. Someone would have to stay behind to provide cover while the others escaped. The math was simple and terrifying. "I'll provide cover. When you hear me firing, you move." Williams grabbed her arm. "Martinez, that's suicide. You can't hold off that many fighters by yourself. I can buy you enough time to get the wounded to safety." Sarah's voice was calm despite the chaos around them. "That's what matters." Anderson, despite his wound, spoke up weakly. "No way, we don't leave anyone behind." Sarah smiled grimly. "You're not leaving me behind. I'm staying to make sure you all get home." She checked her ammunition one more time. "Sergeant Williams, that's an order." Williams stared at her for a long moment. He had been in the Army for 12 years and had never met anyone quite like Sarah Martinez. "You're not even my superior officer." "No, but I'm the one with the radio and the plan." Sarah positioned herself behind a large boulder that would give her a good field of fire. "Tell my family I wasn't just trying to prove a point." Before anyone could argue further, Sarah opened fire on the enemy positions. Her accurate shooting forced the Taliban fighters to take cover, giving Alpha Squad the opening they needed. "Go, go, go," she shouted, continuing to fire as Williams and the others ran toward safety. Sarah held her position for what felt like an eternity, switching targets and conserving ammunition. She could hear Alpha Squad's footsteps fading as they reached the end of the ravine. Her radio crackled with Williams' voice. "Martinez, we're clear. Fall back now." But as Sarah turned to retreat, she saw more enemy fighters moving to surround her position. She was cut off from the escape route. The realization hit her like a cold wave. She might not make it out of this ravine alive. She keyed her radio one last time. Phoenix Base, this is Martinez. Alpha Squad is clear and heading to Checkpoint Charlie. I'm going to be delayed. Captain Rodriguez's voice came back urgent. Martinez, what is your status? Do you need immediate support? Sarah looked around at the enemy fighters closing in on her position. She had maybe 20 rounds left and nowhere to run. But Alpha Squad was safe and that was what mattered. Negative, sir. I've got this handled. She turned off her radio and prepared for the fight of her life. Sarah crouched behind the boulder as enemy fighters closed in from 3 directions. She had 18 rounds left in her rifle and 1 spare magazine. The Taliban fighters were shouting to each other in Pashto, coordinating their approach. They knew she was trapped. She thought about her grandfather's war stories, about soldiers who found themselves in impossible situations and somehow found a way out. Sarah wasn't ready to die in this Afghan ravine, but she also wasn't going to surrender. She had made a promise to bring Alpha Squad home and she had kept it. Now she needed to keep herself alive. The first fighter appeared around the rocks to her left. Sarah's shot was precise and he fell immediately. The others became more cautious, using cover and advancing slowly. Sarah counted at least 6 different voices calling out positions. Her radio suddenly crackled to life. It was Corporal Johnson's voice, breathless from running. Martinez, we're coming back for you. Hold your position. Sarah keyed her radio quickly. Negative. Stay with Alpha Squad, get them to safety. Not happening, Martinez. Garcia and I are already on our way. Despite her desperate situation, Sarah smiled. These men who had once doubted her were now risking their lives to save her. But she couldn't let them do it. Too many people had already been put at risk because of her decision to attempt the rescue. An enemy fighter tried to flank her position from the right. Sarah shifted her aim and fired 2 quick shots. The man fell, but his movement had revealed her exact position to the others. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, forcing Sarah to press herself flat against the ground. Bullets chipped rock fragments that stung her face. She could hear the fighters getting closer, their voices more confident now that they had her pinned down. Sarah checked her ammunition again. 14 rounds left. She noticed something the enemy fighters hadn't seen yet. About 30 meters behind her position was a narrow crack in the rock wall, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. If she could reach it without being seen, she might have a chance to escape. But getting there would mean leaving her cover and running across open ground while under fire from multiple directions. It was almost certainly suicide, but staying where she was definitely was. Sarah made her decision. She pulled a smoke grenade from her belt, a standard piece of equipment she had almost forgotten she was carrying. If she could create enough confusion, she might be able to reach the crack in the rocks. She pulled the pin and threw the grenade as far as she could toward the enemy positions. Gray smoke began billowing across the ravine, reducing visibility for everyone. The enemy fire became more random as the fighters lost sight of their target. Sarah waited until the smoke was thickest, then sprinted toward the crack in the rocks. Bullets whined past her as shadowy figures fired at the sound of her movement. She threw herself into the narrow opening, just as automatic fire raked the spot where she had been standing. The crack in the rocks was tighter than she had expected. Sarah had to remove her radio pack and push it ahead of her as she squeezed through the narrow passage. Sharp rocks tore at her uniform and scraped her skin, but she kept moving. The passage seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning through the rock formation. Sarah could hear the enemy fighters behind her, shouting in frustration as they realized she had escaped their trap. Some of them were small enough to follow her through the crack, and she could hear them entering the passage. Sarah emerged from the rocks onto a steep hillside covered with loose stones. She quickly put her radio pack back on and started climbing, trying to put distance between herself and her pursuers. The rocks shifted under her feet, making noise that would give away her position. Her radio crackled with Captain Rodriguez's voice. Martinez, report your status immediately. Sarah couldn't answer without revealing her location to the enemy fighters behind her. She climbed higher, her lungs burning from the thin mountain air and physical exertion. Behind her, she could hear at least 2 fighters struggling through the rock passage. At the top of the ridge, Sarah found herself looking down at Forward Operating Base Phoenix in the distance. She was about 3 kilometers away with rough terrain between her and safety. But she was alive and she had a chance. She keyed her radio quietly. Phoenix Base, this is Martinez. I'm approximately 3 kilometers northeast of base, moving to friendly lines. Be advised, I have enemy contact pursuing on foot. Rodriguez's voice came back with obvious relief. Martinez. Thank God. What do you need? Just stay ready to open the gates when I get there, sir. Sarah started down the far side of the ridge, moving as quickly as she dared on the unstable ground. She could see the base's guard towers in the distance, but 3 kilometers of hostile territory lay between her and safety. As she moved, Sarah reflected on everything that had led to this moment. She had joined the army to prove she belonged, but somewhere along the way, it had stopped being about proving anything. It had become about serving something bigger than herself. An hour later, exhausted and bleeding from multiple cuts, Sarah reached the perimeter of Forward Operating Base Phoenix. The guards at the main gate cheered when they saw her approaching. Captain Rodriguez was waiting for her with the base medic. Martinez, he said as the medic checked her injuries. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the most foolish. Sarah looked back toward the mountains where she had spent the last few hours fighting for her life. Honestly, sir, I'm not sure there's a difference, but her ordeal wasn't over yet. What happened next would test everything Sarah had learned about courage, leadership, and what it meant to be a soldier. 3 days after the rescue mission, Sarah sat in the base medical tent getting her wounds cleaned when Captain Rodriguez appeared with a serious expression. Martinez, I need to speak with you privately. Sarah followed him to his office, wondering if she was in trouble for disobeying orders during the rescue. Rodriguez closed the door and gestured for her to sit down. First, let me say that Alpha Squad is recommending you for a Bronze Star with Valor. What you did out there saved 4 lives. Rodriguez paused, studying her face. But we have a problem. Sarah felt her stomach drop. What kind of problem, sir? Intelligence reports indicate that the Taliban fighters you encountered have been asking questions about the female American soldier who escaped their ambush. They're taking it personally. Rodriguez pulled out a folder and opened it on his desk. We intercepted communications suggesting they're planning a specific operation to capture or kill you. They see your escape as an embarrassment that needs to be corrected. Sarah stared at the intelligence reports. So what does that mean for my deployment? Headquarters wants to transfer you to a safer assignment, maybe a desk job at Bagram Airfield away from frontline combat. The suggestion hit Sarah like a physical blow. After everything she had been through, after proving herself in combat, they wanted to pull her back because she had become a target. Sir, with respect, every soldier here is a target. That's the nature of being in a combat zone. Rodriguez nodded slowly. I agree with you, Martinez. But the situation is complicated. The Taliban has put what amounts to a bounty on your head. That makes you a liability to any unit you're assigned to. Sarah thought about this for a long moment. She understood the logic, but accepting a transfer felt like admitting defeat. It would confirm what her critics had always said, that women in combat were more trouble than they were worth. What if I refuse the transfer? Then you stay here, knowing that every patrol you go on puts your fellow soldiers at increased risk. Rodriguez leaned forward. Martinez, this isn't about your courage or capabilities. You've proven both beyond any doubt. This is about the reality of the situation we're facing. That evening, Sarah sat alone in the communications center thinking about her options. Sergeant Williams found her there, staring at the radio equipment. Heard about headquarters wanting to transfer you, he said, sitting down nearby. Sarah looked up. Word travels fast. The whole unit is talking about it. Want to know what they're saying? Sarah wasn't sure she did, but she nodded. They're saying that if the Army transfers you because you're too good at your job, then the system is broken. Williams paused. Johnson started a petition asking headquarters to let you stay. Sarah was surprised. The same soldiers who had once questioned her presence were now fighting to keep her with the unit. What do you think I should do, Sergeant? Williams considered the question carefully. I think you should do whatever allows you to sleep at night. If you stay, people might get hurt because of the target on your back. If you go, you might save lives but lose part of yourself in the process. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Intelligence reported that a major Taliban commander had been killed in a drone strike. This commander had been the one pushing for the operation against Sarah. With his death, the immediate threat level decreased significantly. Captain Rodriguez called Sarah into his office again. Looks like you caught a break, Martinez. The transfer is being postponed indefinitely. Sarah felt relief wash over her, but she also realized something important. The experience had shown her that her actions affected more than just herself. Every decision she made had consequences for the people around her. "Sir, I want to request additional training in small unit tactics and advanced combat medicine." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "If I'm going to be here, I want to be as prepared as possible. Not just for communications, but for whatever situation we face next." The captain smiled for the first time in days. "I think that can be arranged." Over the following weeks, Sarah threw herself into training with an intensity that impressed even the most experienced soldiers. She learned advanced first aid, studied small unit tactics, and practiced with different weapons systems. But more importantly, she began to understand her role in a different way. She wasn't trying to prove that women could be just like male soldiers. She was proving that different kinds of strength and perspective could make everyone safer and more effective. The local Afghan women had also heard about Sarah's rescue mission. During the next humanitarian visit to the village, Fatima approached her with tears in her eyes. "The men in our village speak of you with respect," Fatima said through the interpreter. "They say you fight like a lioness protecting her cubs. This gives hope to our daughters." Sarah realized that her impact extended far beyond her unit or even the military. She had become a symbol of possibility for people who had been told what they couldn't do based on their gender. But Sarah also understood that symbols could become targets, and targets could endanger the people around them. As she prepared for what would be her final mission in Afghanistan, she carried the weight of knowing that everything she had worked for could be lost in a single moment of bad luck or poor judgment. The mission that would define her legacy was still to come, and it would test everything she had learned about courage, sacrifice, and what it truly meant to serve. 2 months before her deployment was scheduled to end, Sarah received news that would change everything. Intelligence had located a high-value Taliban target, planning a major attack on a school in the nearby village. The mission to capture him would be the most dangerous operation of Sarah's deployment. Captain Rodriguez briefed the team in the pre-dawn darkness. "This is Hassan Mahmoud, a Taliban commander responsible for multiple attacks on civilian targets. He's holed up in a compound about 15 kilometers from here, surrounded by at least 20 fighters." Sarah studied the satellite photos of the compound. It was a fortified position with multiple escape routes and clear fields of fire. Any approach would be extremely dangerous. "Martinez, your job is to maintain communications with all units and coordinate with air support," Rodriguez continued. "This is not a rescue mission. This is a direct action raid, and things could go wrong fast." The team included 12 soldiers from Sarah's unit, plus specialists from other companies. As they prepared their equipment, Sarah noticed something different in how the other soldiers treated her. There was no doubt, no questioning looks. She had earned her place through blood and courage. Sergeant Williams approached her as she checked her radio equipment. "Martinez, I want you to know something. Whatever happens out there today, you've already proven everything you needed to prove." Sarah looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" "I mean you don't have anything left to prove to anyone. You've already shown us who you are. So today, just focus on bringing everyone home." The convoy moved out under cover of darkness, using night vision equipment to navigate the rough terrain. Sarah monitored multiple radio frequencies, keeping track of the team's movement and coordinating with helicopter support circling overhead. As they approached the target compound, Sarah could see the layout matched the intelligence photos perfectly. The building sat on a small hill surrounded by walls and defensive positions. Getting close would require crossing open ground under potential enemy fire. "Phoenix team, this is Phoenix 6. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through the radio. "We're in position. Martinez, confirm air support is standing by." Sarah keyed her radio. "Phoenix 6, this is Phoenix Communications. Apache birds are on station and ready for tasking. Medevac is 15 minutes out." The assault began with a diversionary attack on the compound's north wall. As enemy fighters rushed to defend that position, the main assault team moved toward the south entrance. Sarah coordinated the movements from an overwatch position, her radio crackling with updates from different team leaders. Everything was going according to plan until the explosion. A massive blast erupted from inside the compound, sending debris flying in all directions. Sarah's radio filled with confused voices as the shock wave knocked several soldiers to the ground. "IED! ID, we have casualties." Sarah's training took over. She immediately began coordinating medical evacuation while trying to determine the extent of the damage. Through her binoculars, she could see several soldiers down near the compound entrance. "Medevac, this is Phoenix Communications. We have multiple casualties requiring immediate extraction. Landing zone will be marked with green smoke. But as Sarah continued to coordinate the evacuation, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Captain Rodriguez's voice was missing from the radio chatter. She had heard from every team leader except him. Phoenix 2, this is communications. What's the status of Phoenix 6? Corporal Johnson's voice came back strained. Phoenix 6 is down. He's unconscious but breathing. We need to get him out of here now. Sarah made a decision that would haunt and inspire others for years to come. She handed her radio to Specialist Morrison, who was providing security for her position. Morrison, take over communications. Coordinate with the medevac and keep air support informed. Where are you going? Morrison asked with alarm. To get our people. Sarah grabbed her medical kit and started running toward the compound. Behind her, Morrison shouted into the radio. Phoenix team, be advised Phoenix Communications is moving to assist with casualty evacuation. Sarah reached the blast site to find chaos. Captain Rodriguez was unconscious with a head injury. 3 other soldiers were wounded, and the team was taking fire from remaining Taliban fighters in the compound. Without hesitation, Sarah began treating Rodriguez's wounds while bullets snapped overhead. Johnson, I need you to help me move him to the landing zone. Martinez, you shouldn't be here. This is too dangerous. Sarah looked up from her medical work. Johnson, I've been in dangerous places before. Help me get the captain out of here. Working together, they managed to move Rodriguez and the other wounded soldiers to a secure area where the medevac helicopter could land. As the helicopter lifted off with the casualties, Sarah realized that the mission wasn't over. Hassan Mahmoud was still inside the compound. Phoenix team, this is Martinez, she called over the radio. Primary target is still in the building. What are our orders? The radio was quiet for a long moment. With Captain Rodriguez evacuated, Sarah was the senior soldier still in radio contact with headquarters. The decision of whether to continue the mission or abort fell to her. All Phoenix elements, this is headquarters. You are authorized to complete the mission. Repeat, complete the mission and extract. Sarah looked at the remaining soldiers. Half the team was either wounded or evacuated. They were outnumbered, low on ammunition and facing determined enemy resistance. But Hassan Mahmoud was responsible for attacks on schools and markets that had killed innocent civilians. All right, people. We finished this, Sarah announced. Johnson, take 3 men and cover the rear exit. Williams, you're with me. We're going in the front. What happened in the next 30 minutes would become legend among the soldiers who served in Afghanistan. Sarah led the assault into the compound, clearing rooms and coordinating with the remaining team members. When they found Hassan Mahmoud barricaded in the final room, it was Sarah who convinced him to surrender rather than fight to the death. As the sun rose over the Afghan mountains, Sarah emerged from the compound carrying an American flag that had been flying over the building. She was alone, the last soldier to leave the objective. Behind her, Hassan Mahmoud was in custody, and the threat to the local school had been eliminated. The helicopter that came to extract them carried Sarah and the flag back to Forward Operating Base Phoenix. When she stepped off the aircraft, the entire base was waiting. Soldiers who had once questioned whether women belonged in combat now stood in respectful silence as she walked past. That flag would later hang in the Pentagon as a symbol of courage and determination. But for Sarah, the real victory wasn't the successful mission or the medals that would follow. It was the knowledge that she had become exactly what she had always wanted to be, a soldier who brought her people home. Years later, when people asked Sarah about that day, she would always say the same thing. I wasn't trying to prove I could be like the men around me. I was trying to prove that being exactly who I am was enough. And it was more than enough. It was everything.